Yo everybody, me and Buster Green here, and today we're talking about Spider-Man. So yesterday, after the insane hell of waiting for decades, Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man came out on Disney Plus last night, and I was so jazzed for this because I've just been waiting for the show since fucking 2016, and now it's 2025, so I waited 9 years. And yeah, I'm gonna tell you guys up front that they dropped the first 2 episodes, and I kinda hated the first episode, but then I loved the second episode, so I'm really glad they did it this way, because if they only had dropped the first episode, I think it would have hurt the show, and I would have been like fully out here just like being like, nah, this ain't no good. So overall, there's a lot to say about the show, and I'm going to go over everything. I'm going to start by going over the show's pre-production because, yeah, this show was a fucking nightmare to get made. The show has been in pre-production hell for over 9 years. That's insane, right? That's like almost as long as the stupid Flash movie, and I think that the show's first episode, it's kind of suffered of a result of that 9-year production value because the first episode feels off to me. Anyway, let's tell the story. 9 years ago, Tom Holland premiered as the MCU Spider-Man in Captain America 3 Civil War. And immediately after that, everyone loved him. Everyone loved Spider-Man being in the MCU. And so in 2016, 9 years ago, work was immediately begun to create a Spider-Man MCU prequel show revealing the secret origin of the Tom Holland Spider-Man, because Civil War skipped over that. And because of the draconian Sony MCU Spider-Man agreement, that agreed that Sony can make all the Spider-Man movies they want, but Disney can make Spider-Man TV shows. And what better premise for a TV show than the untold origin of this MCU Spider-Man? Like, we still don't even know if he had an Uncle Ben. Like, it's implied there, especially in No Way Home, but they never, like, really talk about it. Anyway, I think it's also worth mentioning that 9 years ago, when this was all announced initially, there was a show called Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., which spun off from the original Avengers movie. Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. was a pretty weird show. It posits this branch universe where Agent Coulson somehow survived the events of the Avengers movie, except not really, because it turned out later that the Coulson in the show was actually a robot or something stupid like that. And then he created his own team of like secret agents, and the show had this really weird relationship with the MCU where it was basically like, it was initially a show that could fully reference the MCU, and it had really strong ties with the films that came out when it came out, like Captain America Winter Soldier and Iron Man 3. But as time trickled on and as the show kept going, it weirdly drifted farther and farther from the MCU. It ended up having this like one-way street relationship with the MCU, where like shit from the MCU could trickle down in the show, but shit from the show would never trickle back up to the mainline MCU. And I think finally when we got up to Avengers Infinity War and Thanos and the snap happened, the show kind of realized it was fucked, and it never dealt with the ramifications of that, and it just like quietly let itself get canceled. But anyway, back to Spider-Man. So yeah, the show was initially planned to be Spider-Man freshman year, and it was initially just going to be a limited series strictly telling the origin story of Spider-Man and the events before and after Civil War leading into Spider-Man Homecoming. This show was originally supposed to be promotional material for Spider-Man Homecoming, and it was mostly focused on Spider-Man's origin, seemingly working like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. in that MCU adjacent model that would take material from the MCU and like one-way street it and show how it got set up. In Civil War, Stark interrogates Peter and mentions that Spider-Man has been sighted around New York for the past 6 months. And supposedly from the leaks at this time, the show was going to tell the story of what happened to Spider-Man in those first 6 months. But in a hilarious ironic twist, now that the show is finally out, even though the first episode does give us a version of his origin, they then immediately skip those 6 months just over again. Ha! But unfortunately, for a variety of reasons, the show ended up languishing in development hell for so fucking long that it didn't even make sense anymore. I'm also going to mention that around this time period, Hudson Thames was originally cast as Tom Holland's voice double and seemingly cast for this show. But initially, because of the show not ever coming to fruition, he initially just got started doing Spider-Man's voice for certain attractions at Disney California Adventure's Avenger Campus until the show What If debuted in 2021, finally showcasing Thames in a slightly more substantial Spider-Man appearance. But it's funny that he had this big break in the show, and the show didn't come out for like a decade later. In the meantime, Thames just had the TV Spider-Man role on lockdown all the while. So yeah, back to real life. 2017 comes along, Spider-Man Homecoming comes out, and the show is obviously not done. 2 more years pass, Far From Home comes out. Where's the show? It's not out. So then more time passes, and Spider-Man No Way Home comes out, and there still isn't an origin show. By this point, people were absolutely starting to believe that the show was canceled and it was never going to see the light of day because it had already gone way too far from Spider-Man Homecoming and the whole premise of the show existing as a promotional vehicle for that. And after No Way Home comes out, Disney Plus comes out. And when Disney Plus comes out, Kevin Feige gets poked on to the gangplank and does a Disney Plus investor showcase thing in 2021 after Far From Home, where he finally mentions the show again, along with a bunch of other Disney shows, some of which never quite came to fruition. And his main point was you should pay $10 a month for Disney Plus because you don't want to miss out on all these ancillary Marvel shows that contradict with the movies anyway. And so yeah, we all bought Disney Plus, we all watched WandaVision, and then we were like, oh hey, in Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness, Wanda is fucking crazy. Anyway, meanwhile, in 2021, Jeff Tramiel from Craig at the Creek was finally assigned to be the showrunner of the show and clean it up. And this all came after he supposedly failed to pitch Marvel a passion project. But yeah, so he was now on the show and trying to clean it up. And then in 2022, because the show was public knowledge after the shareholder thing, they did a panel for it at San Diego Comic-Con where the show was kind of formally introduced to the public at the time. They showed some art. And in the panel, they announced that the show had already been greenlit for a second season called Spider-Man Sophomore Year, which supposedly, instead of covering Civil War and Homecoming, would then cover the next year of Spider-Man's life and the events, I guess, leading into Spider-Man Far From Home. Now, I want to say at this point, they realized that it was fucking stupid to make a show that was setting up a movie that came out 5 years ago. And I want to say someone at Disney hit a giant reset button and completely reset everything about the show. There was a small press narrative at this time that the crew of the show acknowledged the reset, and they said that the writers felt like they were being pigeonholed by the show's original premise of just being locked down to the now draconian canon of the MCU, as well as the structure of the show, that each season of the show would be a year of Peter's high school life. And so the whole show was reset. There was also another tangent that the show was supposedly set up to connect to the original version of the Disney Plus Daredevil reboot, but then that show was also reset because apparently it was initially not connected to the Netflix Daredevil show, and the returning cast from the Netflix show absolutely hated that. So anyway, Daredevil is still in the show, but who the fuck knows what anything connects to anymore because nothing matters and no one's trying as hard as they used to. Anyway, so then after Spider-Man, the show was reset. It's no longer in the MCU's sacred timeline and all that BS. It's now in this parallel branch timeline to the MCU because multiverse, woo. And the big difference between being a show set in the MCU and being a show not set in the MCU is now it's kind of a what if MCU show about what if instead of Tom Holland being scouted by Robert Downey Jr. Iron Man, who's now long dead in ancient history, in the what if premise, he's now scouted by the evil Norman Osborn, which, okay, good for them. That's a cool twist. And so that brings us now to the year 2025, where the show finally came out. But even just before it came out, there were even more controversies because everything's a fucking fight. Everything's a fucking controversy nowadays. So boom, we're in controversy corner. Here we are. So anyway, a trailer for the show launched, and the trailer showed the show's unfinished animation, and people were very nitpicky about that unfinished animation. The trailer had some obvious animation errors, the most jarring of that being that in a lot of the shots, none of the background characters were animated, they were just standing there awkwardly, and that threw a lot of people off. The other thing is that the show uses cel-shaded CG animation at a full cinematic frame rate of 30 frames per second. It also uses heavy amounts of rotoscoping and motion tracking, and that's kind of jarring to fans of traditional animation. I think the final show looks good because it does allow them to fully capture the cinematic and acrobatic movements of Spider-Man that we've gotten very spoiled on lately in Spider-Man movies and video games. But yeah, the trailer was unfinished and the rotoscoping looked like shit. I was almost considering if the rotoscoping in the final show was really bad to just like dunk on the rotoscope for this like whole video and like actually rotoscope this video. But like, anyway, the final show, it still has animation problems because they've done it this way, but it didn't seem as like bloomingly wrong as the trailer was, with the exception of a few characters just unnaturally moving and holding pose keyframes for way too long because for like whatever reason the animators stopped moving them. Now, the last major thing that has happened that has upended the show and ended up being the absolute biggest controversy of all was that recently, while trying to hype up the show's Spider-Man voice actor, Hudson Thames, went onto a Reddit AMA and was asked by a troll, "Hey Spider-Man, your show is woke." And the voice actor politely responded to that troll with this full quote, "Well, my biggest fear was that it was going to be annoying and woke, and it wasn't." And I was like, yes, this is great. It's so well written. It feels so real. But unfortunately, that quote ended up pissing off a lot of people because he said the show was not woke. And then the show's showrunner came to his defense saying he misspoke, but literally no one online is having it, with people on the far left accusing Thames of being a panderer, accusing him of being a racist, accusing him of reacting to racists and being a racist himself, and people on the far right, meanwhile, being like, "Oh no, there's black people on the show! That's woke! Spider-Man lied to us!" With people online making fun of the fact that in the show, Spider-Man is the only and last living white boy in New York, and obviously creating a show where Spider-Man is the only white person in New York is therefore in itself racist. Since the show is being received well, I'm gonna guess that Hudson Thames will probably keep his job because this quote was out of context, but it's amazing that it literally pissed off every single person in the country for having their own unique, horrible interpretation of it. Man, I don't think I've ever seen an actor fumble this hard on something this small ever before. Additionally, on top of that, there was a lot of like controversies with the show using like race swapping, with Norman and Harry Osborn now being reimagined as wealthy black characters, which I'll talk about later. And then the second episode also stirred up its own controversy by re-racing and regendering Dr. Kirk Connors into this sexy black lady. Although Doctor Strange is still white, right? So we at least know that canonically two white people exist in this universe. Anyway, I'll talk about that later because now I want to go over the show and I want to talk about that organically in the structure of the show. So yeah, the first episode, didn't like it. The first episode is rough. I do overall like the art style the show landed on, trying to become a funky marriage between modern CG animation and cinematography while trying to echo back to the original 1960s Ralph Bakshi's Spider-Man show, the first animated Spider-Man show, and in terms of also doing what they did while trying to straightly adapt Steve Ditko's original art from the original Spider-Man comics. I should also mention that when I signed up for Disney Plus back in the day, one of the main reasons I even bought Disney Plus was so I could watch the old Bakshi Spider-Man series, because I've never seen that series online. It's extremely hard to find DVDs or bootlegs of it, and the internet loves memeing on that show because like some parts of it were so stupid. And still to this day, the Bakshi Spider-Man has never been uploaded to Disney Plus, so I feel like I was deceived, and what the hell? Give me my fucking Bakshi Spider-Man already. Now, on top of that, starting off the show has an opening song that's pretty cringe. It's like a remix of the Bakshi Spider-Man intro song, remixed with this like super generic, dumb rap song. I don't think I love this because the song is just bad, and if anything, it kind of reinforces the racist sentiment that this is a show about a Spider-Man surrounded by black culture, unable to integrate with it. But yeah, overall, the opening sucks. The animation for the opening is good. I like how hard it's trying to reference the old comics, but overall, I hope they change the song. I'm not digging the song. Okay, anyway, let's start going over the first episode. So the first episode starts off promising enough with Peter going to school, May gives him a ride, and before he can even walk into the door, oh my god, a sky portal opens up, and it drops out Doctor Strange to explain the portal, and then it drops out the Venom symbiote on top of this funky Bugman. The Bugman has this like big fuzzy collar. For like a second I thought he was Kraven, but no, he's just like some weird alien Bugman. And then on top of the Bugman is the radioactive spider for some reason, which in this continuity makes it actually an alien space spider, which makes him just like fucking Japanese Spider-Man. So, oh shit, is this the same spider that bit Japanese Spider-Man? Is this the spider from Planet Spider? Anyway, it's not explained, you just have to like deal with it. So Strange and Venom have this giant like epic MCU fight, and immediately they blow a hole in like Peter's school, and I'm surprised they don't kill anyone because it's a pretty big fucking hole. Peter himself is caught in the crossfire, but somehow he doesn't really care, even though like he doesn't even have powers yet, and that should like technically be like really injuring him. But anyway, Strange and Venom leave, and Peter immediately ignores all that to introduce himself to this hot Japanese goth girl named Nico Minoru. Anyway, I don't know what the fuck happened to Venom. I think Strange took Venom away. But yeah, the plausibility here is that maybe the symbiote got left behind to set up Venom later, unless I missed it. But anyway, back to Nico because that's all the show cares about. So yeah, then Peter is super focused on Nico. And in the first episode, Peter immediately meets and befriends Nico. But then like a second later, like they skip ahead. In the next scene, it seems like they've literally been like best friends since childhood. And Nico kind of seems like super into Peter. Like she's unnaturally clingy for a random girl character. Anyway, that kind of felt like a mistake to me. It felt like they retconned it from like an earlier draft where they were always childhood friends to them not knowing each other in the opening scene because they needed to introduce Nico. And it all doesn't track. But why would they skip over their entire relationship to just like they make them extremely close to each other like a few months later? Okay, one more thing about the pre-production because I had to look it up. Apparently the show randomly swapped out Ned and MJ from the Spider-Man movies for Harry Osborn and Nico Minoru, aka Sister Grimm from The Runaways. Now, I'm not sure why they did this. I guess it's just different for the sake of being different. But Nico's character is pretty low on the Marvel power ranking. I'd say she's like an F rank character. In short, she's like a bisexual Japanese macho girl character. She's always been a pretty cool character in the comics with like her own fan base. Despite the fact she says she's bi, she is mostly considered a lesbian by fans due to her commonly being shipped with women. I'm not sure how I feel about her being Parker's bisexual best friend and therefore a replacement for MJ. I mean, I overall think she's a pretty cool character, but I also feel like it's weird if they're literally just retelling the story of Spider-Man Homecoming with some differences and now she's in MJ's role, then doesn't that fate her to ultimately become Peter's girlfriend? And it's weird that this character is kind of like well renowned for being like a hot girl lesbian. Like, who the fuck knows what they're doing? But in the meantime, she's just a copyright avoiding Zendaya character, and if Peter ends up like with her, I guess it would be refreshing and new, but I can also see like fans of the character having like issues with that, with her like randomly being Peter's girlfriend. Anyway, yeah, so right now the show establishes that Peter has a female best friend that he's not into because he's randomly into a random girl named Pearl Pangan. Pearl Pangan is a random new character who seemingly replaced the race swap version of Liz Allen from Homecoming, because that character had too much baggage, I guess, both from Homecoming and from the original comics. But unfortunately, he can't get with her because she is unfortunately already dating this random jock football player named Lonnie Lincoln, who the show really wants you to know is from Harlem. Lincoln is another weird character because he seems to be a narrative replacement for Flash Thompson as Peter's rival and bully, but he doesn't actually antagonize Peter, and he's not a bully. He seems to be a friendly guy just coming from a weird troubled background. And meanwhile, Peter instantly resents him for dating the girl he likes. So if anything, by not being Flash and by Lonnie just being a seemingly nice guy, a sympathetic character from a troubled background, it makes Peter look worse by comparison, and it seemingly makes Peter seem like a cringy incel who wants to invalidate other people's relationships and fuck their girlfriends. Anyway, I'm not really sure where the show is going with Lonnie yet, but it seems very weird that they really want you to know that he's from Harlem and that he's had a rough life. Meanwhile, Peter makes his Spider-Man uniform, and it's a completely different Spider-Man uniform from the one in Civil War. That one had a hoodie, this one has like a hockey jersey. It's kind of like a spider hockey uniform. I guess Kevin Smith would love that. I overall like the costume. What I really like is that at this point in the show, he doesn't have the web slingers optimized, so he needs like a nitrogen tank, and Peter's like constantly adjusting the tank. I thought that was a really cool detail, although I really hope that a supervillain eventually catches on to that and blows up the tank. That would be awesome. Anyway, there's like a blink and you'll miss it scene where Peter saves Harry Osborn, but I don't think they acknowledge each other. And then the big fight scene of the episode is that Peter beats up a bunch of YouTubers doing like Logan Paul, Johnny Somali YouTuber crimes, One of them gets a brick to the head, which everyone was joking would probably be a fatal concussion, if not serious permanent brain damage. So yeah, way to go, Peter. You just killed that kid. At the end of the show, they redo the scene from Civil War that introduced Peter and Tony Stark to each other. And they also set that up by having a weird moment where Peter pulls a DVD player out of the trash just to like track with Tom Holland's improvised dialogue. We're introduced here to Norman Osborn, who just seems to be a stereotypical black gangster in this universe. So now that we're here, I need to talk about Black Norman. Overall, I think I'm 80% cool with it. I thought that ever since like they rebooted Spider-Man and like the Andrew Garfield movies, I feel like they should have recasted Norman Osborn to be black, just simply based on the basis that in the original like Ditko comics, he gave Norman like this stupid hairstyle that made it look like he had cornrows, and everyone always joked that Norman and Harry in the comics like had cornrows and it was stupid. So casting a character that actually has cornrows as Osborn gives you a character that is closer to the comics in some weird roundabout ways. And let's face it, when he inevitably becomes the fucking Green Goblin, the Green Goblin is just a guy in a rubber suit. So at that point, it doesn't matter what fucking race he is because it's just a rubber suit. The character, meanwhile, is played by openly gay actor Coleman Domingo, which is a problem for some people. So far, the only complaints I have about him is I don't really know where he's going with the performance yet, but that's only because Norman so far has only had one line in each episode so far. I do think Domingo's voice is a little too high-pitched for Norman, especially the way he's drawn like a linebacker here. I guess, ironically, he kind of sounds like Mike Tyson. Is this like Coleman Domingo doing a Mike Tyson impression? That's kind of weird and a wild take for the character, but I'll reassess this character later, but so far, I'm okay with it. So as long as we're talking about the race swapping, I might as well talk about episode 2, which introduces a race and gender swap Kirk Connors. What the fuck did they even name her? Carla Connors? I would go with Catherine, but okay. Overall, the jury is out on this one because they barely introduced this character, but considering that Tom Holland MCU Peter seems to exclusively date colored girls, maybe this could be a funky, inappropriate relationship if they ship her with Peter. That could be dramatic as fuck, and I'd be interested in that. I guess I'm interested overall in where they're going with this. I hope they don't make it stupid, but yeah, if she turns into the lizard and it turns out to be like a hot lizard woman or like a scary monster lizard woman, that would be interesting. Anyway, yeah, show me your lizard woman. I want to see what's happening next. So anyway, back to episode 2. Episode 2, I thought was a huge step up from episode 1. Episode 2 is where they're finally getting the show running on all cylinders, and I thought it was a lot better than the first one, with a more like focused storyline. And I thought that the first episode had a lot of like weird pacing issues, and I think episode 2 like overcame that. The biggest developments in episode 2 are that Spider-Man starts his Osborn internship and ends up taking this like internship class with like 3 other science kids. Now, I did an internship before and like we didn't have a classroom, but it didn't work like that. Anyway, whatever. This is a fake show about a fake company. The other 3 kids are all worth talking about because one is clearly the current MCU Black Panther Shuri operating under a fake name. The other is future MCU's second Hulk Amadeus Cho, who was initially teased all the way back in Avengers Age of Ultron as eventually maybe existing. And the last character is this like bitchy mean white girl who is apparently the super villainous Finesse, who is apparently Taskmaster's daughter. Then the B plot of this episode is that Peter leaves the internship to randomly fight a minor like F-tier character named Butane. This is a super ancient minor character from the 90s who, if I remember my comic lore right, Alistair Smythe eventually mutates him into like a derpy looking ripoff of the Human Torch. Like all his old comic book appearances give him like this sad derpy looking emoji face. I really hope they do that in the show. I really hope the show is doing like a year 1 for him where he's just like set up as this like horrible low-level pyromaniac character, and then he gets stronger as Peter gets stronger. He also has these gauntlets here that kind of remind me of the Shocker, and then when I'm reminded of the Shocker, I remember that Shocker was like a low-level grunt in Homecoming. So they've got this guy who's kind of giving me Shocker vibes, and then they had this girl who was like replacing Liz Allen's role in Homecoming. I wonder if they're slowly building up and slowly gliding into Homecoming's Vulture plot with this guy now. Either way, I'm intrigued to see where this eventually goes. Then the episode ultimately ends with a wacky twist of Osborn spotting Peter changing into his Spider-Man costume in the stairwell, and now 100% knowing that Peter is Spider-Man, which I want to say completely changes their dynamic in the long run. Now, I want to say overall, this is not a bad thing, and I think it actually opens up a lot of narrative doors for a new story that they could tell in the show. Because a lot of the early conflicts in the comics between Peter and Norman were spawned out of the fact that Peter didn't know Norman was the Goblin, and the Goblin didn't know Peter was Spider-Man, and when they found out, they were already sworn enemies, and it just made them hate each other more. But in this case, I honestly think this is super interesting for the narrative because there's so many different ways this could go. I guess the show is seeding that Norman is already evil in this universe and maybe already even the Goblin, so it's very likely that maybe Osborn is setting up Spider-Man to be Civil War, high-tech suit level Peter, because we know from the trailers of the show that they're eventually going to cover the events of Spider-Man Civil War. But anyway, Osborn is maybe setting Peter up as a fall guy, and therefore could then set up the Far From Home twist of fuck Peter Parker, he's a public enemy, let Jameson have him. But anyway, that's about it so far with these first 2 episodes. Before I close out this video, I do want to overall discuss like the race swap controversy and all that and everything. I overall think I'm okay with the race swaps in the show, and I'm okay with it more than like other movies and other things, because I feel like overall the show is trying to do some new ground by race swapping the characters, and I'm actually curious where the hell they're going with all of it. But usually the argument against race swaps is, well, why the hell did they do that? They could have just made original characters and that would have been better. But here's the thing, this show is doing that too, because when I see these new original characters like Grace Pangan and Lonnie Lincoln, these are characters who are new characters, but then they're replacing the roles of other characters. And I don't know how I feel about that either, because that actually seems worse to me than the race swap characters, because I have zero attention or affection for these characters, and I also kind of know the overall like role in the story they're playing because they are already replacing characters in the movies. And so far the show's done nothing to make them compelling or interesting, so I actually think that might be a mistake. Now on the flip side, going back to Homecoming did a great job reimagining Peter's supporting cast as like modern diverse kids, but where the fuck are any of they? Like I really thought Homecoming did like an awesome job like fleshing out like Peter's like high school like circle, and I can understand writing out MJ and Ned because going straight into MJ as the obvious love interest is kind of boring narratively. And Ned's got some funky legal problems because he overlaps with Genki Lee so hard that it's hard to sort out where Ned starts and Genki finishes. But seriously, where is Flash Thompson? Even the nerdy MCU version would be okay. And the only retro character in play from the comics so far is Harry. But Harry seems like he's like a celebrity who doesn't even go into school. So maybe the storyline they're going for here is that maybe Norman is going to set up Harry as Peter's best friend in some unnatural way. Like maybe Norman is going to like assign Spider-Man to be Harry's bodyguard, and that's how they'll become friends, which honestly seems more normal to me than just like Spider-Man happened to be childhood best friends with the richest kid in New York. I guess overall I don't mind the race swaps or the new characters, even though the new characters just aren't super interesting to me. I think what bothers me the most about the show is just that so many of the legacy Spider-Man characters haven't shown up so far, and they feel like they've been benched. I feel like if they're not going to use any of the legacy Spider-Man characters, then that's kind of a recipe for disaster. I'm reminded of that one CGI Batman show from 20 years ago where they went super out of their way to only use D-list Batman characters, and then the show ended up getting instantly canceled. Anyway, I guess that's everything I have to say about the show in the first 2 episodes, but that was actually a lot. Holy shit, I talked for over a half hour? Alright, I gotta go pay my taxes. Night, everybody.